Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 98 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. You are not alone. The words sound true when strung together and handed to us lovingly, but leave us confused with their dissonance. Contrary to what we are told, we are alone with many things in our life. Even those blessed with family and friends are physically, mentally, and emotionally separated from them to some degree by the nature of this existence. Despite our longing to uplift loved ones, we are unable to bridge these inherent gaps. By no fault of our own, we are relegated to words and perhaps touch, which although offer brief escape and respite from symptoms, fail to pierce and pull the tangible root of the struggles that envelop them. They hold space and offer solace, yet the pain persists. In the dark, in the quiet, amid the din of the crowd. I am here, but you are alone. We want to be of service, but we fear ushering in and releasing hopelessness with this truth. How can this manifest anything beyond discouragement? By being two things at once. The truth hurts, but the truth shall set you free. The acknowledgement is a deep breath and sigh, and the soul is grateful. Here's my chat with Stephanie White.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being so patient.
You've had a busy morning. Do you need a minute to decompress?
Technology just murdered us for about 17 minutes, but we made it. We're here.
That's all right. We adapt and we overcome.
The worst part is in the midst of it all, having to log in and out, I caught a glimpse of myself and I looked exactly like my mother. So it just made the day even better. When you finally look like your parents, that's when you realize you're old.
Yeah, you need reading glasses like we've talked about. And
yeah, you're wearing yours. I think I threw mine across the room earlier today. So
then again, why are we surprised that this comes for us all, right? We somehow believe we're going to be exempt.
I think a lifetime of maybe not sleeping at night and then staring at tiny screens, 2 a.m. in the morning trying to fall back asleep, probably had nothing to do with it.
It's definitely sped up.
How's the weather up there? I'm in Boston. It's freezing.
It's cooling off now. I've had some frost mornings. We've had some light flurries that haven't stayed. And then we've had some warm bouts. This is where the weather gets kind of weird, right? We have some warm days. We have some cool days. And then leaves are falling. And then one day you wake up and there's snow on the ground. So, but again, we shouldn't be surprised because this happens every single year. It is what it is.
Except for the snow part in DC. But,
right.
Well, cool. Listen, we got the weather and our old age out of the way. What are we diving into today?
Well, heavier stuff, that's super light, right? And then the reason why we wanted to talk was your article that you wrote on suicide. So let's go from the lightest of light to the heaviest of heaviest.
We wanted to fake people out and make them think this was a,
sure,
friendly, joyous environment for the morning.
Like we have nothing to talk about and we're just trying to fill time.
The article I wrote.
Right. So I think maybe to start us off, you were questioning, what are we doing? What are we doing about it? The loss of firefighters, emergency service workers. And your main point was to stop simply telling me not to kill myself. Telling me not to do something doesn't really help. So I think maybe you were thinking about more upstream than downstream.
My goal for this podcast is absolutely to educate people, but my secondary goal is to get you to say a boot as many times as possible. The article that you're talking about, it was my editor's opinion for Firefighter Nation for the month of November. And it's funny because the month of November, we were going to be talking about sleep. And we had another suicide in the state of Virginia, which is where I'm based out of. And I believe it's our 5th one for the year, which for one state, one suicide is one too many. But to have that many was just absolutely heartbreaking. And then in the same week out of Texas, there were 2 more. And I got with our state clinician for our state peer team. And I said, listen, what can we do? How can we educate people? What can we bring to them? Let's do something. Let's do a conference. And we started throwing out the same we'll do this class and this. And I stopped and I said, Beth, what are we doing? This has been done to death, but we're still having the same rates of suicides. 2023 was an absolutely dangerous year for firefighters when it came to death by suicide. So if in the 21 years I've been in the fire service, if I've been hearing the same message and I'm still seeing the same numbers, 21 years is a long enough experiment. Let's change up how we do it. And the thought behind the article is, listen, we've all heard, don't kill yourself, call a friend, reach out, we'll talk you through it. All amazing messages. Knowing people are in your corner is an amazing thing to know. But I think we all know at this point that we're in a certain level of danger, that the things that we see, the lack of family support simply because your family might not know what's going on in your head. So we know all the things that lead to firefighter suicide. We understand the obstacles that we're up against. I don't think you necessarily need to remind us not to commit suicide. We didn't talk about committing suicide in the firefighter risk the whole first half of my career. In fact, first 3/4 of my career, I would say. But I think there's been such a surge in talking about it that we've gotten awareness 101 out of the way. And I think we need to capitalize on that. And what's the next step?
Yeah, you also lose a lot of the audience when you repeat the same message every single time the topic comes up. So I have said this in the past about stigma around mental health. Eventually, we have to stop talking about the stigma around mental health and realize we've talked about it. We've put it out to as many people as we can. If there's still people that don't understand it, they can get to it in whatever other way they need to with previous, recordings or presentations. But at some point, we have to move forward and actually talk about things deeper than just the stigma that's the barrier. We've got our foot in the door talking about suicide and it's been more normalized, but now we really got to start talking about it.
It's funny because I just had a thought as you were saying that, listening to you. I wonder what was the complete reasoning for us not talking about it. We all know we're egotistical as firefighters, not always in the worst way, but we don't talk about our feelings or emotions. But also, did firefighters innately know? Probably about a quarter or a third of the problem with firefighters and suicide is how comfortable and normalized it is for us. We see it. We see the end result. We see the fact that that human being is now at peace when we run these calls. It's already something that's been in our face often. The rest of the general public doesn't have that comfort level. We do.
We're really good as human beings compartmentalizing things. So seeing something that you see at work and understanding that it occurs in the world and actually it being something in your personal life are two different things. And I think we could make the analogy of you and I talking about getting older and all of a sudden realizing that our vision changes and suddenly we're surprised and oh my God, how has this happened? We see everybody around us get older. We realize that happens. We realize that everyone's going to die. We realize that happens. But we do such a great job, and our culture, I think, is really detached from death being a part of life that we just don't think it's going to happen to us. And this is the irony of the whole thing. You see suicide a lot. You see death a lot, more than normal people. It is a normal thing. Suicide's a normal thing. Death is a normal thing. It happens all the time, everywhere. It's not uncommon, but the general public is in a bubble that may never see it or rarely ever see it. We just happen to be there more often because that's part of our job, to show up to what's normally happening in life. But I think we still detach ourselves from it. So there's just no realization that it's something that you could contemplate and it could be in your world that you have to deal with.
Well, and did they not talk about it? Because we're proud people and we don't want to admit we're at risk for anything. Did they not talk about it because innately somewhere they knew, hey, let's stop normalizing it, and they didn't want to put that idea out there for those who might be struggling? I wonder if that was part of the reason that it was kept so quiet for so long, because of instinct on the part of the generation before us. But you're right. We've talked about our suicide risk to death, no pun intended. We've talked about stigma. What are the next steps? Because we are being repetitive and we risk losing the attention that we've captured. And that was really what that article was about. What are the next steps in suicide prevention and mental health now that we've hit this awareness level? We can't keep repeating the same verbal curriculum over and over. How are we bringing it in? And resiliency, I think it's the same thing on the end of resiliency. I think we're at danger of losing any ground that we've captured there. We can't keep using the same words and thoughts over and over. The thing about great teachers is they can say something, they can look at you and realize phrasing it that way didn't work. Let me move on and rephrase it another way. The concept of resiliency will never die. It's always going to be needed for everyone in life, not just firefighters, all human beings. But we've talked about resiliency enough. So what's the new phase? How are we re-articulating it for those that we haven't captured the first round when we started talking about resiliency?
Here's another irony. Firefighters say all the time to people that aren't firefighters or new firefighters, you don't know what it's like because you haven't experienced it. You have to experience it. This training we're doing in this burn building is nothing like the real life. That's true. And they keep saying you don't know it until you experienced it. So if you have no true personal experience of ever feeling this way, we have to understand from the outside, we are on the outside looking in, that you truly do not know, if you've never been in that place before and been feeling that, what it actually feels like and what the person's actually dealing with. That's no fault of anybody. It's just a starting point as we build perspective and understanding and trying to empathize with people, that you really don't get it until you've felt it. And the flip side of that, just to balance it out, is that a lot of people that have been struggling with mental health issues for their whole life or trauma that they haven't dealt with, they also may not know what actually feeling good feels like. They don't know they can feel better until they feel better. So there's always this leap of faith with trying to do things in your life differently. I want to be happy. Well, you need to do things that would allow your mind to have an environment that it would allow it to finally experience happiness. But you need to be doing those things when you're not happy. Happiness just isn't going to come. So the same idea, you would need to start doing and setting your life up and your mind up in an environment that would allow you to not have the mental health issues that you have, with really not seeing much of a result until one day it clicks and you have a result and you feel differently. And then you have this hindsight of looking back going, I had no idea how much I was actually carrying until I did all these things for this time, and then it lifted. Your whole world has changed, and now you can speak to it, but you had no concept until you actually experienced it.
I wrote another article this past week, short form article for LinkedIn, and it was my ode to Veterans Day, essentially. And I talk about something I experienced when I was 16. I was down ground zero at the Pentagon. Should never have been there, but I was. Working with an NGO, and the national anthem on, I believe it was Thursday, there was a national moment of silence, and then this tiny little EMT jumped up on stage and she sang the national anthem, just a freaking amazing voice. And as a result, for the rest of my life, when I hear the national anthem, because I was 16, I didn't know anything about mental health. I mean, what 16-year-old in 2001 did? So I have a reaction now, even at the age of 39, when I hear the national anthem. I probably always will. And I do the same thing every time. I put my head down because it's embarrassing, because my eyes water, and I make sure my heels are lined up and my toes are lined up. And it's just something I focus on. And it didn't really hit me until recently, just how abnormal that is to still be having the same reaction. And so what the article was focusing on is stop trying to outgrow the reactions you have when it comes to trauma. Start realizing that that is your normal and that is okay. Why do I care what others are thinking when my head is down and I'm trying not to tear up? I will probably always have that reaction, and that's okay. So figure out your comfort zone within that reaction.
But would it be abnormal for you 20, 30 years on from hearing a song that you heard in a beautiful moment, or you smell a perfume, or you smell a certain type of food cooking, and you have this wonderful feeling wash over you of nostalgia and warmth and comfort and security and happiness and reminiscing and all that, and then you would never say, wow, is it abnormal for me to have this happening 30 years later because that happened so long ago?
Right?
Why do we only do that with bad? See, I just used the word bad, so I'm gonna back up. We're all learning. Why do we do that with those different emotions, but we welcome what we see as good?
That's an amazing analogy, because you're right in every way. Why are we doing that with the difficult emotions? And I think that's something we're not addressing. I think we make people feel as if put those emotions to bed, put them on a shelf. But something I try to tell people is deal with it. Put it on a shelf so you know where it is. Because if you don't know where a memory or an emotional is, it's going to smack you out of nowhere. And you're not going to be prepared for the response. But if you sit with it, you digest it, you figure out if you're comfortable or not comfortable with it, or if that's going to go away, you put it on that shelf. When those moments arise, you're going to know, I know I'm going to have that reaction. And there's safety in that. There's knowing, okay, I'm going to be in this moment for the next 180 seconds, but I can handle that and I can deal with it. And I think that's part of the conversation that we're missing. We talk so much about mental health. Realizing that we'll never get over some things is absolutely okay. And we need to normalize that. That was the whole point of the article, was you're going to find your way to deal with it. You're going to find your tribe of people to talk about it with or not talk about it with, a tribe of similar-minded people. It's okay. Might take 2 years, might take 20, but you'll get there. And I think that's something we absolutely need to normalize, is it's okay to have those moments and those memories pop back up. And some of them might be completely ugly and you might not want them to ever pop back up. So that might be something where you need to seek a higher level of treatment, right? A therapist or somebody who knows better, who can help you with those tricks.
So I think what you've been speaking to is culture. And one thing that you inferred when you were speaking about the national anthem and the way you felt is that washed over you. You know you're going to tear up. You put your head down. You stare at your shoes. That's saying, culturally, this isn't accepted. I'm embarrassed. I'm not allowed to cry for an internal reason in public, so I don't want people to see that. But if you were feeling proud in that moment and you were having an amazing experience, for you to smile and put your face up while the national anthem's being sung, you would have no qualms about that whatsoever. So there's a lot of things culturally that are in place that keep us, either society at large or within the fire culture, that are just norms and values, right? This is what we do. It's weird for you to go and do yoga on your front lawn. That's something you might do on your back deck, or you might do in your house or at a yoga studio, but you can't do that. You're not allowed to meditate in public. You can't just sit down beside a lamppost and meditate. You're not allowed to walk around and talk to yourself. That's considered crazy. If you have an earbud in and people see that maybe you're having a phone call, then that's okay. So there's a lot of things that are okay and not okay that we all create. And what I want to leap off of this with is expectations. So whenever I mentor a rookie or did mentor a rookie, the very first day I want them to have clear expectations of themselves and then to truly understand what my actual expectations of them is. Because I think if you don't set that tone, they have unrealistic expectations of themselves and they don't really grasp what my expectations of them are. So they think, I got to hit the ground running here. This is life or death. I have to know as much as possible. I can't possibly screw anything up. I have to know 30 years worth of content and knowledge and skills. And they're in their head thinking that that's what I'm expecting of them. So I'm like, listen, you need to be good at what you're good at right now. And you have to realize that I don't have that level of expectation of you. What you also have to realize, and I've said this before numerous times, is that there's actually way more expectation on me than there is on you. Because I've been here for 25 years. So if I screw up, I've had 25 years to learn that and know that. And I either haven't done it, so I've been complacent in how I approach my own skills, or I just made a mistake. So I just want them to bring that level of expectation down so they're not so jacked up with what they should be knowing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy where they end up screwing up more and more and more. So the right level of expectation. So do we need to have a realistic expectation of what our impact and responsibilities and roles are around our colleagues having mental health issues and maybe considering suicide? Because we are not the only thing in their life. They have family, they have friends, they're having experiences outside of work. They also don't come into the job as a blank slate. They may come in knowing or unknowing that they have mental health issues already and that the job is going to exacerbate that. And we also cannot know in real time what people are experiencing and feeling while they're at work in the station or on calls. So I think it's important that we have a realistic expectation of what our responsibility is. So when you end up at a funeral, unfortunately for someone that's died by suicide, and we are wearing the full weight of losing that person, you can't do that. You are not their keeper. Even if you were in their family, we are physically and mentally, there's a barrier between me and you. I can't drop into your body and in your mind and then make you feel what I wish you could feel so that you then don't feel what you're feeling now. I can't do that. It's impossible. So even when we know that people are struggling, everything can be done for that person. They can still make a choice for themselves, which I think we can get into in a little bit, and take their own life. What I want us to be able to do then is to focus on what can we do in our limited way, make sure we do those things 100%. And then if we still lose somebody when we're actually at a funeral, it's not unrealistic trauma and grief on us. It's traumatic. It's a loss. We can mourn. It's frustrating. We can be angry, but we don't have this guilt and shame because we know we did to our best ability, to our physical and mental limit. Within us having that small piece touching that person's life, we did our part. So I know it's a long lead in, but I'd like your thoughts on hearing me say that.
I think when we lose somebody, especially if it's somebody on your crew, on your shift, or somebody who once was just somebody that you have that brotherhood responsibility for, I think we incur a certain amount of shame because I think we feel it's my job to save human lives. And here's this person that I see 24 hours in a row or longer, or that I did see 24 hours in a row or longer. If it was a past shift mate, I think we feel that we screwed up, that we left somebody out there to drown. We're so good at hiding what goes on in our lives. Something I did in my own life is when I got married, it was hilarious. Nobody knew. I married somebody in the department. Nobody knew we were married. Very few people did. When I got divorced, very few people knew I was getting divorced. When we had our first kid, so many people didn't know. We're really great if we want to be about privacy. That was very eye-opening to me how many people around me didn't know because I am very strict about my privacy. That was a little scary. That was a little shocking because it made me see why it was so many people struggle alone. Because if we want to, we are subject matter experts at hiding our emotions, hiding our feelings. That needs to be thing number one that we put on that table.
But is it hiding or is it privacy? And then the second question to that is if I'm struggling with something and I realize, A, I could be getting the help that I do need. B, it could be I'm struggling with a practical problem that I know my colleagues can't fix. Because I think we're making an assumption that everything that everybody's dealing with can be fixed by the crew or the department or by family or by friends. Even if we are wide open about it, everybody in the room that you're being wide open to and fully vulnerable, the only response may be that really sucks because they can't practically fix it for you. So I think we can't have an expectation that every problem that someone's dealing with, especially when they reach the point of where they want to take their own life, that there are things that we could not fix for them, even if they wanted us to, and even if we wanted to.
Ooh, well, here's where I'm going to argue that a little bit with you. So we talked about taking the spinning plates off the broom earlier. Verbalizing something is a spinning plate because even if I can't fix it for you, I can listen to you. I might not have ever been through it. I might not have the wise counsel. I might not even have to say something though. Normalize saying things out loud because that's what therapy is. If you think about it, that's most of what you're paying an expert to do is you're sitting there and you're saying it out loud and you're problem solving it yourself half the time. That's so often what it is. I think it's both. I think it's privacy and I think it is hiding a little bit. It's hiding something that we think is broken within us. Normalize telling one person, the right person, what's going on in your life. Because if I can say something out loud, I mean, sitting here having this conversation, right? You're saying something out loud and you know what? That's probably helping you think of, oh, you know what? I need to make this point because it'll tag on to that point. Your mind is moving, the wheels are spinning, and unburdening yourself can help you solve that problem. So I think it's a mixture of the two, of privacy and hiding.
Dialogue should absolutely be encouraged. We should have friends, colleagues, counselors, people we can speak to. There's value in it. Nothing of what I'm saying is saying that there's not value in that. I would never want someone to think that they can't talk. I would like them to have the realization that there's no pressure to talk to anybody in their fire crew if they don't want to. If they want to talk to someone outside of that, just have somebody. But I think we also need to have the realistic, practical understanding that you can talk about it till you're blue in the face. Like, still do it, but just we need to realize as the listener, and they need to realize as the person talking about it, I mean, they are experiencing it, so whether they know it or not, that there are practical things that talking about them doesn't fix. And there are things that can go on for years, not just like I'm having a problem, this is a rough month or a rough week or a rough call. Like, there are things that talking, I think, can fix very quickly in the short term. But there are very practical things that people are facing. And then sometimes when you're dealing for that heavy and that long, it's even that much more effort to try and say all of it again. So I would just like us to have an understanding that sometimes talking about it is just symptom relief, which is valid. But if the person was talking to us, and then we can have the unrealistic expectation of ourselves because, well, they did open up and they did talk to me and they still took their life. So I shoulda, woulda, coulda done more about it. The thing they're talking to you about may have been going on for years and may go on for years still. And they may be doing all the things that they're supposed to do for their health and well-being and for the management of themselves. And the practical thing still persists. And they can't make it stop because they're not in control of that. So I think we need to have an understanding of what is symptom relief and helping us manage and what can actually be fixed. Because there are problems that people cannot fix for each other.
No, you're absolutely right. Actually, it's a really amazing point. So here's the next question. What are the spinning plates that we can fix? So we've all been in a situation, family, firehouse, wherever, where our day's already going poorly. And it's just the tiniest thing that makes us snap. That's true for so many aspects of brain health. So what are things that we can teach people? Because I think the concept that we need to value is self-rescue. Something a therapist can help me work through and fix because they're a subject matter expert isn't so much self-rescue because I've involved people who know way more than I do. But self-rescue to me is I'm staying up until 2 a.m. I've developed the worst sleep habits. I'm drinking every night. I'm not working out. I'm eating horrible foods. All these things that lead to a really messed up endocrine system, because I think it's kind of hilarious that we all make jokes about women in their menstrual cycle or teenage kids going through puberty. We know as a society that hormones affect our moods and make us unstable. But for some reason, as firefighters, we don't stop and think, oh, hey, one 24-hour poor sleep cycle destroys my hormones for a month. And I don't want to stop and think, hey, maybe that can affect me in the same irrational way as an angry little 13-year-old heading through puberty. So I think that's something we need to be discussing is what are those small plates that we can take off that broom that help us self-rescue? And I think that is a big conversation we need to be having, is acknowledging that we don't know enough of what's going on in our body due to our chronic lack of sleep.
I think everything is self-rescue because you are either getting education or perspective from somebody, and then it takes you to put it into practice. And you should learn about as many of the healthy things you can to set your body up for success and realize the things that the job may be hindering and harming in you, like you mentioned, sleep and types of calls and foods. There's a lot of controllables. I think there's a bit of grace in there because if you looked at all the things you're quote unquote supposed to do every single day.
It's a long list.
How much water you're supposed to drink, when you're supposed to eat those calories, when you're supposed to work out, how often you're supposed to work out, what type of workout you're supposed to do. You're supposed to meditate, you're supposed to do cold plunges and saunas, you're supposed to go for a walk in nature, you're supposed to read 10 pages of book every day. It'll probably take me a day to explain all the things that are out there on the buffet of the things you should do. And they all, and especially, you look at Huberman and all the protocols that he's recommending, right? When you're supposed to wake up at a certain time of the day and you're supposed to get a certain amount of sunlight in your eyes. And before you go to bed at night, you're supposed to turn your phone off. It goes on and on and on and on. And we could either have the reaction to go, it's all too much, ignore it all, which is wrong. But equally, try and do it all in a day, also wrong. And then it also creates this high energy anxiety of, if I don't do all the things, I'm not going to be as healthy as possible. So it's having this counterproductive effect. Somehow over your day, over your week, over your month, over your life, you're just going to have to try and make sure you do a number of those things as often as possible, whenever you can, to try and balance that out through your life. Because it's actually impossible to do all the things you're supposed to do every day for your body, or you wouldn't work and you wouldn't have a family. You would wake up in your apartment by yourself and you go through these robotic steps every day and you go to sleep at the right time, you wake up and you repeat, and you would do that until you die. So somewhere in there is the messiness of life, and we need to have some grace and understanding that there's going to be shittier days and weeks and better days and weeks, and that you're just at least aware of the things and you keep making effort.
Well, it's prioritizing absolute needs versus, you mentioned Huberman and his protocols would be really great for your body needs. Those are two separate things. Since I was a kid, every day I have just gone outside with music on. And most of the time it was taking walks. And that's something that's continued into my adulthood. In fact, I picked where I live so that I could do that, because that is something for me that I feel like I'm not thinking. But it turns out I've gotten to the end of my walk and realized, no, my brain was moving and problem solving the whole way through. I just was so busy relaxing that I didn't even notice it. And I solved a lot of problems. That's a need for me. That's something I have to do mentally for myself every day. And I can see a difference in my level of mental fatigue / despair at the end of the day. When I don't do it, I feel flat if I haven't taken that half hour for myself to do that. So I'm killing two birds, one stone. It's basically meditation. I'm out there in nature. And it's knowing those things about yourself. And do we even have time in this insane society to know those things about ourselves? I'm very lucky. I discovered that incredibly young. I can't imagine having to randomly discover that about myself now. As chaotic as life is, as a mother, as a wife, as a firefighter, and with other things that I do, I don't have time to discover that about myself. Yet I now know it's something that I desperately need. I'm going to have to figure out how to do that in 40-degree Boston today, but it's going to get done because I know I need it. So long answer, but that's something that needs to be part of our mental curriculum, is finding that thing that you have to do that settles your mind and gives your mind peace every day. Because there is something for everybody. It might be working out, might be learning to play an instrument, reading a book, whatever. There is something for your brain that will give it peace. And even if it's just half an hour of peace, it's amazing what that does. So that's something that has to be part of our arsenal. Because you're right, there's too much information out there. We went through the paleo era. We went through the meat-atarian era where guys just wanted to only eat meat, no veggies.
The carnivore diet.
Thank you.
There's some validity. Unless you're trying things out for yourself, you'll never figure out what works for your body. People have had great benefits beyond the carnivore diet. All their autoimmune disease issues abate, or they're better managed. So, there's a lot of awareness around that of like, well, you just stopped eating a bunch of garbage that you used to eat. Now you're eating just actual food. So that's the reason. But I think there's legitimacy to people's bodies responding to certain diets in certain ways. But until you're self-experimenting and trying to play around with that, then you don't know if it's going to work until you land on it. Maybe it is just about trying one or two things and trying to integrate them into your life, and until it clicks that works, then you can kind of put that on autopilot and maybe look into the next thing as opposed to doing all the things at once.
I think we've, and you and I always do this when we talk, we've wandered way down a trail what we originally set out to talk about, which was, how do we restructure the conversation? What's the next phase of the mental health conversation? Where do you see it going? We've put all these tiny things out there. We just talked about diet, but that's been something that's been on the radar since whenever CrossFit became popular.
Well, I don't think we're necessarily talking about it the same way it's always been talked about. I'm trying to attack these topics with open, more realistic perspective than it's been talked about before, as opposed to saying, hey, eat right, here's some options. This conversation is the new conversation. We can talk about those topics, but we need to talk about them in a way we've never talked about them before.
Right.
And so I'll put one out to you right now. There's a fear around talking to people about suicide. We're worried if we bring it up that someone's actually going to do it, right? We realize that that's a bunch of garbage, that that's not true. If we want to have an actual real conversation about this, I'm putting this out there as something to talk about. For the sake of the conversation and understanding what people are going through, I think one of the hardest things for us to understand and accept is bodily autonomy. So why is it that it's my body, my choice for so many other issues, but when it comes to someone deciding whether they want to continue on with their life or not, there is no bodily autonomy in that? Suicide is all about that person and what they're dealing with and struggling with up until the moment that they actually want to not continue their life, and then it's all about us. I don't want you to leave because the rest of us are going to suffer. Even though your suffering will continue by you staying, and we seem to understand this more with physical illness, and this gets down the MAID rabbit hole, but I'm putting it out there because this is a cultural feeling. We can understand when someone's suffering physically is not going to end by them choosing to leave, that their suffering is gone. We'll even say things like, I'm glad their suffering is over. But we do not have that same perception if someone's mentally ill and is suffering relentlessly. That is also not going to change depending on what they're struggling with, because a lot of the things are fixable, some are not. We do not have that same acceptance that a person can make a choice for themselves to end their own suffering We would rather them stay and suffer so that we don't all suffer because they left. And I know that's a hard thing for people to hear, but that's also not a topic on the table. Bodily autonomy of one's own life.
So that has been a debate since you and I were kids when Jack Kevorkian came on the scene. It is a fascinating subject because I have a personal opinion on what's going to happen if I face a terminal disease. Having seen people die so often from terminal diseases and watching their family suffer as they're practically in a coma, but not, and they're not mentally there and they're in pain, that is one side of the equation. But when somebody is suffering in that way, they're suffering from something that is completely mechanically, physically terminal. Let's pick cancer. You know your body has gotten to a certain point. Somebody is not coming back from that. They are in extreme pain, but yet they're not physically aware of what's going on around them. Somebody putting a protocol in place for that when they know that their health is headed that way is different, because that is a plan made with complete mental presence and awareness of where their life is headed and what's going on, and that the situation is, and I don't want to use the wrong word here, but the situation is unfixable. The cancer has taken over their body. I think that's a completely different choice. I mean, it hurts to lose a loved one to cancer, but we know that nothing is going to bring them back from the brink of death. We know that is where they're headed. And I think the reason suicide hits so much differently is because so often, and unfortunately, privacy happens to go out the window when someone dies by suicide. We find out then so often what was going on in their life. And I think as the outside party, we can look at their life a little more objectively than they could at that moment because emotions aren't involved. We're not feeling the same level of chaos they did. And we can look at things and say, but that was fixable. You know, here's the solution to this or the solution to that. 2008, when the US went through a recession, the amount of suicides went through the roof because people lost all their finances and there was a sense of hopelessness and they committed suicide over that subject matter. And I think somebody looking in could have probably have said, you could have started again, or I could have financially helped you. They saw a solution to the reason the person committed suicide.
That's a perfect place to start, and I'll put a pin in that. So let's talk about that, where there are financial situations that people can be put in that, if you knew all the details of it, that it is not fixable. We can ask ourselves, is every financial situation you can be put in fixable? And is it fixable by the people around you in your life? Are people going to pull their savings out of their bank account and give it to somebody to fix their financial issues so they can get back to their life, even just at a functional level? Are people going to do that? Are people going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars and pool that and give it to somebody on their crew because they're financially struggling and have lost things? We very often see people's financial problems as mistakes that they've made. They made bad choices. They're in a bad financial spot where not every financial situation is their fault. And then we have to ask ourselves, is it fixable? Or is the person now looking ahead at a situation that none of us would want to be in? And yet we say from the outside, that's fixable. You should do A, B, and C, and it will be better.
I think that's an absolutely loaded question, because do I think there are people in my life who would do everything possible in that situation to help me out? Yes, I think there are loved ones who would. Do I think maybe 10 years ago my life was in that spot if I was in that situation? No, not necessarily. So you're right. We do view it through the lens of this is something that somebody brought upon themselves. But at the end of the day, yes, there are options. And I'm not judging in any way, shape, or form if somebody has committed suicide over a dire financial situation. Because if you're facing what looks like homelessness on the street, absolutely, I understand people making that decision. But my point is, with a clearer head, people on the outside can see more options to fix something. And that is why we hurt so much. They might not be great options, and that might be why the person has chosen to commit suicide, is they don't want to ask for the help, or they don't want to live with a different life standard or whatever. But with a clearer head, those on the outside can say, but no, there was this one option you didn't think of that could have actually solved it in a way that would have been comfortable to your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess what I'm driving at with all of this, my main point is to have true understanding and empathy and compassion for people that are in that mindset. And not everybody that's in the mindset of choosing to leave this life, not every single person is mentally ill And I think if you're taking your own life due to mental illness, that could be managed by medication and by support. Everything should be done, as we say, and I'm kind of pulling at the threads of what do we really mean by everything. It's easy to say we can do everything. What is everything? And what about this thing? Will we do that? My whole thing is to have this true understanding and empathy and compassion understanding of why.
I think you're talking about the person who dies by suicide who is just, they're done and they're tired, and this is the relief they seek, is the peace, is the person you're driving at.
Yeah, and the fact that there actually legitimately is no foreseeable future for even if it's the next 10, 15 years, that it's going to get better. And people can't guarantee that. People can say, well, it will always get better. Does it always get better? I know I'm asking like hard devil's advocate questions, but if we want to have a real conversation about suicide, this is why I'm driving at. I want to break it open. That's my point. I'm not trying to talk any of the stuff that we've done down. I want to open this up. It doesn't always work out for everybody.
You're perfectly making the point. And the point is the next generation of suicide prevention needs to be teaching people how to care for themselves. Because when I'm tired and when I'm exhausted and when I feel run out of options and I'm at a breaking point, it's because there were things in my control that I was just too overwhelmed to take care of. Listen, there are always going to be some people that we cannot save, because you're right. There are going to be some people who are at the end, and it's just, I'm tired. I don't want to keep going, and I'm done, and I'm exhausted. But how do we keep people from reaching that point? By teaching them the little ways to take care of themselves and how those little ways can build up. Okay, if I teach you 10 little things, that's going to equate to one medium thing in your life, essentially.
And then all of that should continue, and we should be screaming that from the rooftops and encouraging each other. Like, I fully believe in all of that, and I have said all those things, and I still, in this moment, in this conversation, believe all of that. I guess what I get tired of is everything happens for a reason. It's all going to work out in the end. You know, if you just give it some time heals all wounds. There's a lot of these sayings that it's not real.
I don't believe in any of those things.
Right. So if we're saying the same things over and over again and we're trying to drop that and have real conversations, then let's stop using those phrases. Let's stop sending those memes. You know what? The person that may be causing problems for the person that's struggling, they're reading the same inspirational memes as the person struggling is. So everything doesn't always work out for everybody. It may work out for one person and it may not be working out for the other person. So that doesn't mean then just leave this life. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we don't truly see people and understand people and what they're going through if we're not being real about it.
So that leads me to a little story. In 2016, my ex-husband and I split up, and it wasn't a matter of contention between us, any of that, but it was just really, really hard on our two sons. And one of them only wanted to be with their father. One of them only wanted to be with me. And obviously that created a lot of hardship for both parents. And I remember just really being in the throes of despair, because you have one kid who hates you at the moment and one kid who his life is over every time he's away from you. And that was, I will have to say, the worst thing I've ever been through in life. And it went on for 2 years. And I remember, okay, time will fix this kind of stuff. And you got this, all that meme stuff. And I was in Vegas for a jiu-jitsu tournament. It was World Masters. And I met this coach. Didn't tell him anything that was going on in my life. Nothing. There was no conversation about it. But after a dinner I was at, we had a conversation, and this man looked at me and said, I firmly believe that you can do anything you want to in life and anything that you put your mind to. All he said. Didn't know anything about the situation, anything about my life, really. We had just had an hour-long conversation. And I went home and completely changed my life. And I snapped out of the despair because somebody looked at me and said, you have the power to do whatever it is you want to do. And that gave me all the motivation and energy in the world. It's just somebody not giving me a meme, just looking at me and saying, you can handle your life and the shit in it without even knowing what was going on in my life. And it made all the difference in parenting. It really did. Went home and did some hard stuff in terms of handling the situation. And life is amazing for all four of us now with how we parent and co-parent and for the kids. And sometimes it's a matter of just looking at somebody. Don't frickin' say, you got this. Don't say any of that. It's just a matter of reminding them of the human being they have the ability to be. And that's giving them a little bit of the power back and the despair that they've been in. That's something worth considering. Leave the memes at home, look at somebody and say, I know you feel you don't have the ability to handle any of this right now. However, I've seen what you have been capable of in your life, and you are capable of this now. Is there something I can do to lighten your load? And I think basic honesty like that is something that goes a long way.
There is huge validity and power in words and the intent behind them. One of the most powerful things I've heard offered, someone was struggling, a friend was helping them, they were in a dark place, and what it was passed on to me that they found that was helpful was, I wouldn't be angry at you if you left, but I'm glad you're still here. And that person, for the first time ever, was actually, this is what I'm talking about, the empathy, the compassion, they actually felt seen and heard and understood, and they didn't feel the pressure on top of everything else that they were dealing with that brought them to that dark place. They weren't then dealing with the shame and the guilt and the expectation and the weight that they can't leave because other people will suffer. They were given permission that if I was you, I completely understand and I would probably be thinking the same thing and I'd probably want to leave. And if you do, I'm not going to be upset with you because I get it. What you're feeling is valid and your reasoning for wanting to leave is valid, but I'm glad you're still here. So that extra piece is not saying I want you to go. You're seen and you're understood fully, and I'm not going to be upset with you, so you don't have to wear that on top of it. But I'm really glad you're still here with us. So it gave this person this permission to not feel trapped. And maybe that was the turning point.
So I think what we've just verbalized is just basic, difficult conversations. Nothing flowery, nothing fancy, nothing anything. Just, hey, I see you and I see where you stand and I see what you are in the middle of. It's ugly. Maybe just a little bit of acknowledgement, a little bit of empathy. Goddamn, you're going through something.
And that's really what empathy is really realizing that I don't know if I could make it through it.
Are we about to head for a crisis right now that we are taking the conversation in this direction? In the US, we are living in such an unempathetic culture. I mean, we are at war with each other. And I know it's not necessarily neighbor to neighbor. It's not as bad as the media makes it out to be. But if you're living your life online like so many of us are, or if the things you're being attacked with, I know it's not neighbor to neighbor where I live. But if I were to log on or to watch the news or any of that, my God, my hope would be stripped from me immediately in life. And I was scared that as a culture, we're going to be headed for some tough mental health times for those who are already struggling. So is the next step for us being completely aware of what is going on in our nation? I don't know what the culture is in Canada right now. You guys are way nicer than us. We already know that. But it's something we need to be paying attention to in the US fire service. Make sure you're extra empathetic to those around you, because what they're seeing when they walk out into the world is very cruel and ugly and hopeless.
Yeah, I think I've grown to understand that the fire service culture, as much as we want to make it this unique, special thing, and the trauma a unique, special thing, it's just not as unique and special as we make it out to be. The fire service culture is made up of the people from the culture of large. Mm-hmm. Same people. We're not different people. We have the same political views and the same morals, the same values. We just come together at a fire station to work together. And the job is unique, but I mean, every job is unique. Like, our job's nothing like a dentist's job is super unique, but that's also, dentists are made up of people from the society at large. And I think we turn away a lot of counselors sometimes too, saying, well, if you don't know this job and what I do, you can't help me. I understand there's bad therapists out there that wouldn't understand anybody's trauma and they're in the job for the wrong reasons. We have people in the job for the wrong reasons that shouldn't be in it. So every job has that. That's the same thing. But there are people that are trained in trauma, and trauma is trauma for the most part, and there are things that can help that. So we don't do ourselves very much of a favor when we say, oh, we're so dramatically special and unique. We are dealing with what we're dealing with, and we need to understand it, and we need to address it, yes. And there may be specifics, but overall, it is just health and mental health and physical health, and we need to be doing certain things for each other and for ourselves to get better. Now, on the cultural side of things, I've never been to your fire department before. Actually, the Canadian American Fire Service are not that different. And we think it's drastically different, and it's not.
We think Canadians are nicer.
It's exactly the same. You have amazing, great people in the States. You have amazing, great people in Canada. We're literally the same landmass with the same restaurants on Main Street as you are, watching the same movies and looking at the same social media. And we were just as enthralled and feeling dramatic and impacted by your election than you were. And we're not even there, because I think we just have this sense of realizing like whatever happens in the States sort of that's kind of happening here. And we are kind of dealing with something very similar here as well. So the same cultural divides, long-winded lead-in like I'm known so well for. But point being, when you're struggling in your department and you don't like the administration or the executive, the union, and it's a big mess, and the department as a whole is a mess, what does your crew tell itself when the rest of the department seems to be falling apart? What is the phrase that's used?
So the phrase I use is, I work for Station 9. I work for the captain that I work for, and my department consists of the guys and gals at my kitchen table. And I have reached out for that feeling a couple times in my career, and it completely changes my mentality. I can control what happens around me in terms of the culture in my firehouse. When the department's falling apart, that's what you focus on, because you know what? If you have this happy, joyous crew, and when you run calls, you're just a pleasure to be around and you're having fun on the call, if appropriate, that leaches into the company that is running next door with you on that call. Joy is contagious.
Okay, so that's the exact same thing that happens in my fire department. And the one down the street, and the one next to that, and the one next to that. So if you feel your country is falling apart, what should your feeling and reaction be?
Empathetic joy.
And focusing more locally on what is happening within your reach and your sightline. So when you interact with people in your community, or, you know, my country is my community, or my country is my state, whatever size that you need to wrap your head around as that you're going to focus on and try and be a good part of, how does that not just translate the same way?
No, you're absolutely right. That is so much of what, at least where I live, culturally happens. I live in an amazing, amazing community right outside of Washington, D.C. We can actually see the Capitol building. It just doesn't affect us. And I think that's a big part of the culture there. But I think ensuring that people know that and see that around us, that is reality and not what is being shoved down our throats by the media and by social media and by antagonizing people, being brats online. I think that's going to be something that's key over the next couple years that we as an American fire service need to nail home is, no, you're not saving people in vain, because we all have that moment where I say, why am I destroying my life and my health to save people, is something that I said the day after Election Day, just watching both sides be the worst humans they could be. And the answer is, that's not reality. It's reality for 10% of the country. 90% of the country is amazing and feeling the same level of annoyance I am. But I do think that's something that's going to pop up in the American Fire Service over the next 4 years. It's just that level of what is true reality when it comes to how people really feel about each other. Ignore the media, ignore the social media, be that person that you just said, that person that spreads the joy on calls. Well, be the person who does it from your front porch as well to your neighbors.
Here's one of the things I love most about being in the fire service is that the calls we go to are the great equalizer. If someone's in a car accident, it doesn't matter what car you're in, how expensive it is, your body gets damaged just like mine does, and you need the same help that anybody else does. I've been in rich people's homes of that race, and I've been in poor people's homes of that race. I'm not saying that we're all on equal footing. There's obvious disparities and struggles that people are having, and race is a part of that. That's not what I'm talking about. But I've seen me going to help people on calls, my actual experiences, I've seen people of all walks of life, at all, if you want to call it levels of life, dealing with all the same issues. And that my job is to help them. And they all want the same thing, right? They all want health. They have a problem that needs to be solved, and we're there. Tying this back to what we initially started talking about is that we see a lot of death, but we compartmentalize and don't want to incorporate it into our life of an understanding. Our job gives us the greatest real-time interaction with death for us to actually contemplate it in our own mortality and then ask ourselves questions and actually come to some sort of epiphany and growth on death and our relationship with it. Our job gives us the opportunity to interact with all different people of all walks of life, of all socioeconomic status, to actually understand that we're all the same. So if you look at another race and you have all these labels and negative thoughts and you're bigoted towards them because you think they're lesser than you or the decisions they make, how are you blind to all the people in your life that are doing exactly the same thing, that are just as shitty, just as angry, just as all the things you would label to the other race? You turn a complete blind eye to the people of your own race that are doing exactly the same thing. And you see it all in your job. So how are you not having the epiphany like, oh shit, why am I ignoring my own race when it happens? But when I see other races do it, that's them. And I have a bigoted opinion towards them. This job should be blowing your mind open about the reality of what we're actually facing in the world. And we just don't let it happen.
So I think what I'm hearing is the first step in the new suicide prevention conversation needs to be empathy. Empathy, for others around you, because other people being kind and understanding with you helps your mental health, right? It helps your own mental health. Pardon the Irish, but when I'm being a dick to people around me, it does put me in a darker place. It doesn't give me the same feeling as when I'm kissing babies and handing out lollipops. So empathy with those around you, but also empathy with yourself. When you're going through something, when you're in a dark place, have a little bit of care with yourself in saying, I'm struggling to find something that's not a cliche, right? Because we just challenged ourselves not to hand out memes and cliches.
Don't wear shame and guilt on top of it all.
Don't wear shame and guilt on top of it all, but realize that it's a cycled part of your life, that it is not the totality of your life, that it is a picture, a part of your life, and give yourself that empathy and grace as well. I think that's one of the spinning plates. I think it might be the one that sits on top that we can self-rescue with, is having some understanding for where we are in life, where we've come from, and where we can go.
Yeah, very well said. If we're able to understand that on top of everything you're dealing with, it seems counterintuitive for me or for anyone else to accept that we're not trapped in life. You're not held hostage in this life. You do have autonomy and choice over yourself. And we always want to frame that as in like, we've got autonomy and choice to do all the goodness in your life, and you do. But I'm saying that we have a hard time understanding that people have autonomy over their own bodies and whether they want to continue in life or not. And we don't want to say it to ourselves or each other, but actually saying it and hearing it might give that person the only empowerment they ever had or had facing what they're facing. To hear that you have autonomy over your own life and choice. It would sound counterintuitive because we think, well, that's going to just give them permission. And that's not what it is. It's just acknowledging that you are not trapped. You have choice. This is your body and your life. And maybe in that moment, being seen and being heard in that empathetic, deep way, they may think, okay, all right, I'm not trapped. That actually makes me feel good. That actually makes me feel a little better. And maybe then that's the start of the upward spiral.
It takes the shame out of it. And then that's a little piece of stress that someone has just taken off of that person's plate. Is you've got all this alphabet soup on top of a plate. We've removed the word shame, and that plate's now a little lighter.
When we talk about dark moments and about this topic, at the point of suicidal ideation, it doesn't get any harder than that. The step off the bottom is so slight, but it's off the bottom. Right at that very moment, hearing those words, I think, is ironically the one thing that might keep people to stay without saying you have to.
I think you're absolutely right. It's counterintuitive as it feels and as we've culturally taught ourselves. You're right. We've hit this one. We've come up with some great ideas.
I was excited to talk to you about it because I know you would want to talk about it. You really do want to talk about it in a different way. And hopefully over this time, you feel like we have. And we're both going to walk away and actually ponder it and question perspectives. And that's all really this is all about. It's not about having a solution. Like, I don't think what we offered here is like, here's a solution to it. My solution to things is to break them apart into a million pieces and then try and put them back together. And if you end up putting it back together the way that it originally was, well, then it obviously means that it needs to continue doing that. But if you put it back together slightly differently, then obviously that's progression, right? It needed to change.
Well, thank you for taking this apart with me. It's something that I do think needs to change. And it needs to change through conversations like this, of tearing it apart, figuring out the stigma, figuring out what we can help people control, and then figuring out what they themselves can control.
I appreciate you as well.
Thank you, Scott, so much for having this conversation.
Remove carcinogens and get your gear compliant clean with Unimac laundry equipment. Find it at alliancelaundry.com/fire.